Have you ever read a single comment and suddenly your whole night changed? Tonight, I tried to sleep. I closed my eyes, turned off the lights, and told myself everything was normal. But then, I remembered your comment. Just a few words on a screen, yet somehow they felt louder than silence, stronger than sleep. It's strange, isn't it? In a world full of millions of voices, one message can reach straight into your heart and refuse to leave. I kept reading it again and again, wondering, did you really mean those words? Because sometimes a comment isn't just a comment. Sometimes it's a feeling, a confession, a moment that quietly changes everything. And tonight, your comment won't let me sleep. So instead of fighting it, I decided to speak from my heart and tell you exactly what your words did to me. It's late tonight. The world outside is quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of silence where you can hear the smallest things, the ticking of a clock, the faint sound of wind against the window, the slow rhythm of your own breathing. I should be asleep by now. The lights are off. The room is dark, and everything is exactly the way it should be when someone is ready to rest. But I'm not resting. I'm lying here staring at the ceiling, thinking about something that refuses to leave my mind. A few words, just a simple comment, something you wrote that probably took only a few seconds. But somehow those words stayed with me. I tried to ignore it at first. I told myself it was just another message, another voice in a sea of voices that appear and disappear every day. We live in a time where people write things constantly. They comment, they react, they move on. Most words fade away almost instantly, like footprints in the sand after the tide comes in. But yours didn't fade. It stayed there, quietly repeating itself in my thoughts, long after the screen went dark. I read it once, then again, and again. Each time the words felt a little heavier, a little more real. It wasn't just what you said, it was the feeling behind it. Sometimes you can tell when someone writes something quickly, without thinking. But sometimes there's something deeper, something honest, something that carries a piece of the person who wrote it. Your comment felt like that. It's strange how a few lines of text can travel across distance and time, and somehow reach someone in a very quiet room in the middle of the night. You don't see the person reading it. You don't hear the silence around them. You don't know the thoughts that begin to grow after those words appear, but they grow anyway. Tonight, your words grew inside my mind like a question that refuses to be ignored. I kept wondering what made you write it, what moment you were living in when those words came to you. Maybe it was late for you too. Maybe you were sitting somewhere with the same quiet surrounding you. Maybe you hesitated before sending it, or maybe you wrote it without realizing how far those words would travel once they were released into the world. Because words are powerful in ways we often forget. They move through people. They settle in places we didn't expect. And sometimes they wake something up inside us. That's what happened tonight. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. But the moment I did, your comment appeared again in my mind, clear as if it were written on the darkness behind my eyelids. I thought about the tone of it, the honesty of it, the way it felt almost personal, even though we are separated by screens and distance and lives that probably look very different from each other. There was a sincerity in it that's rare, the kind of sincerity people usually keep to themselves because the world can be loud and careless with genuine feelings. Most people protect their thoughts. They hide them behind jokes, behind short messages, behind silence. But sometimes someone decides to say something real. When I read your comment, I felt that kind of truth. And truth has a way of lingering. I found myself sitting up in bed, reaching for my phone again, even though I had already read the words many times. The screen lit up the room with a soft glow, and there it was again. Your comment, the same simple message that somehow carried more weight than the entire quiet night around me. It made me think about how often we underestimate the small things we do. A few typed words, just a simple thought shared with someone else. We rarely imagine that those words might reach someone at the exact moment they needed to hear them. But sometimes they do. Sometimes they arrive like a small light in a dark room. I kept asking myself why your comment mattered so much to me. Maybe it was the honesty. Maybe it was the timing. Or maybe it was the feeling that for a brief moment, someone out there truly understood something that most people overlook. Understanding is rare. Real understanding is even rarer. And when it appears unexpectedly, it has a way of staying with you long after the moment has passed. The night continued moving forward. The clock kept ticking in its steady rhythm. The world outside remained quiet and distant. But inside this room, inside my mind, there was a conversation happening without any sound. Your words on one side, my thoughts on the other. And between them, a feeling that something small but meaningful had happened. I realized that sleep wasn't coming anytime soon. Not because I was restless or anxious, but because my mind was awake in a different way. A thoughtful way. The kind of wakefulness that appears when something genuine touches your heart. Your comment didn't shout. It didn't demand attention. It simply existed, calm and honest. And somehow that mad, it impossible to forget. So I stayed there in the quiet, letting the night stretch a little longer than usual, letting the silence hold the echo of your words as they continued moving gently through my thoughts, turning a simple moment into something deeper, something reflective, no, something that made the darkness of the room feel a little less empty, while the memory of those few lines kept returning again and again, refusing to fade, refusing to disappear, refusing to disappear, lingering in the stillness of the night, like a quiet voice that had found its way into a place it wasn't expected but somehow belonged, reminding me that even in a world filled with endless noise, sometimes a single honest comment can travel farther than we ever imagine and settle softly into someone's mind, keeping them awake in the calm hours of the night while the rest of the world sleeps, leaving them there in the dim glow of a screen and the quiet weight of a feeling that started with nothing more than a few simple words written by someone who may never fully realize how deeply those words were heard in the silence of this moment where sleep should have come easily, but instead gave way to reflection, curiosity, and the quiet realization that sometimes the smallest connections are the ones that stay with us the longest. These moving gently through our thoughts, while the night continues to breathe outside the window, and the darkness holds its calm presence around a mind that keeps returning to the same message again and again, as if searching for every hidden meaning between those simple lines, wondering about the person behind them, wondering about the moment they were written. They were written, wondering about the invisible thread that allowed those words to cross distance and time and arrive here in this quiet room where the night grows deeper and the silence grows heavier, yet the mind remains awake, listening carefully to the echo. Feck a comet that refuses to let sleep take its place while the hours slowly pass, and the quiet understanding begins to settle deeper into the heart, like a calm realization that sometimes the most unexpected words are the ones that linger the longest in the stillness of a sleepless night, where thoughts move slowly and meaning reveals itself little by little through the simple memory of something someone chose to say, without knowing how far those words would travel. Once they entered the quiet space of another person's mind, where they now remain steady and persistent, like a gentle reminder that even the smallest message can carry a weight that echoes far beyond the moment it was written. It's strange how a few simple words can change the way a night feels. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. I told myself that maybe I was reading too much into it, that maybe your comment was just another passing thought written quickly before you moved on with your day. That's what most comments are, after all. Quick reactions. Brief moments. People type something, press send, and the world keeps moving forward without stopping. But something about your words didn't feel like that. They felt slower, more intentional, like someone paused for a moment and allowed their real thoughts to step forward instead of hiding behind the usual noise that fills conversations online. That kind of honesty has a certain weight to it. It's quiet, but it's noticeable. You don't have to search for it. It simply stands there, calm and clear, waiting for someone to understand it. When I read your comment again, I started to realize that it wasn't just the words themselves that kept returning to my mind. It was the emotion behind them. Words are interesting that way. On the surface, they're just letters placed next to each other, forming sentences that anyone can read. But beneath those letters, here's something else. There's intention, there's feeling, there's a part of the person who wrote them. And sometimes, when you read something truly genuine, you can feel that part reaching through the screen. That's what happened tonight. I started thinking about how easy it is for people to hide what they really feel. Most of us do it every day. We protect our thoughts because the world doesn't always reward honesty. It's safer to stay quiet. It's easier to say something simple and move on. But every now and then, someone decides to speak from a deeper place. Your comment felt like it came from that place. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that moments like that are rare. That moments like that are rare. Not because people don't feel deeply, but because they don't always show it. Real emotions are often kept in the background, like soft music playing in another room that most people forget is there. But when someone opens the door and lets that music be heard, even for a moment, it changes the atmosphere. It changes the way you listen. Your words did that. They made me stop for a moment. Fixed not in a dramatic way, not in a way that demanded attention from the entire world, but in a quiet, personal way. The kind of pause where your mind steps away from everything else and focuses on one small detail that suddenly feels important. I started wondering what made you feel that way. What experiences shape the meaning behind those words? Every person carries a story, whether they share it or not. Sometimes that story appears briefly in something they say, like a small window opening for a second before closing again. Maybe your comment was one of those windows. Maybe there was a moment in your life that gave those words their meaning. A memory, a feeling, a realization that stayed with you long enough to become something worth sharing. And when you wrote that comment, even if it seemed simple, it carried a piece of that story with it. That's the part that stayed with me. Because when someone shares something real, even in the smallest way, it creates a connection that didn't exist before. Not a loud connection, not the kind that people celebrate with excitement, but a quiet understanding between two minds that briefly meet in the same emotional space. Those kinds of connections are easy to miss if you're not paying attention. But tonight, I was paying attention. Maybe that's why sleep feels so distant right now. My mind keeps returning to that moment, replaying the feeling of reading your words for the first time, and realizing that there was something sincere within them. It's this something that felt human in the most honest way. In a world that moves quickly, sincerity has a certain stillness to it. It doesn't rush. It doesn't compete for attention. It simply exists, waiting for someone to recognize it. Your comment carried that stillness. And the more I sit here thinking about it, the more I realize that moments like this remind us of something important. They remind us that behind every message, every sentence, every small interaction, there is a real person experiencing their own life, their own emotions, their own quiet nights filled with thoughts that may or may not ever be spoken aloud. Sometimes those thoughts remain private forever. It's the bull. But sometimes, for reasons we can't fully explain, someone decides to share a small part of them with the world. When that happens, the words they choose become more than just communication. They become a reflection of who they are in that moment, a glimpse into the way they see things, the way they feel things. That's why your comment stayed with me, because it didn't feel empty. Because it didn't feel empty. It felt like someone speaking honestly without trying to impress anyone, without trying to sound perfect, without trying to turn their feelings into something complicated. It was simple, and maybe that's what made it powerful. Simplicity often carries the deepest truths. The night outside the window continues quietly, the same way it always does. The wind moves gently through the darkness, the distant sounds of the world come and go, and somewhere out there, people are sleeping peacefully without realizing that a small conversation is happening in the silence of this room. A conversation made entirely of thoughts. Your words on one side, my reflections on the other, and between them, a realization slowly forming that sometimes the smallest expressions of honesty can travel farther than we ever expect, touching someone's mind in ways that are impossible to predict, touching someone's mind in ways that are impossible to predict. So, reminding them that even in the quiet distance between two lives, so understanding can still appear for a brief moment through nothing more than a few carefully chosen words written by someone who may never fully know the impact those words carried. Once they arrived here, in the stillness of this long and thoughtful night, where the silence continues to deepen, shears, and the mind continues exploring the meaning behind a simple comment that quietly revealed how powerful sincerity can be when it appears unexpectedly in a world that often forgets how much strength exists in the simple act of speaking from the heart. Sometimes in life, we move through our days surrounded by people, messages, conversations, and noise, yet we still feel like no one truly sees the deeper parts of who we are. We talk, we respond, we share pieces of ourselves, but most of the time those pieces stay on the surface. The world is fast, and people are busy. Everyone is moving forward, carrying their own stories, their own worries, their own quiet thoughts that rarely find the right moment to be understood. That's why moments of real understanding feel so rare. Not the kind of understanding where someone simply hears your words, but the kind where they somehow feel what you meant without needing a long explanation. It's subtle, quiet, almost invisible to everyone else. But when it happens, you recognize it immediately. Your comment made me feel something like that. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't try to prove anything. It simply existed with a kind of calm honesty that felt different from the endless stream of words people usually throw into the world. And when I read it, there was a strange moment where I stopped and thought, somehow this person understands something that most people pass by without noticing. Understanding is a powerful thing, not because it solves problems or changes the world instantly, but because it reminds us that we're not completely alone in the way we think or feel. Sometimes we carry certain thoughts for a long time without realizing that someone else out there might be feeling the same way. Those thoughts stay quiet inside us, like echoes in an empty room. Then suddenly someone says something that matches that echo, and in that moment the room doesn't feel empty anymore. That's what your comment did. It created that small moment of recognition where something inside me paused and said, someone out there gets it. I think. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not completely, but enough to make the silence feel a little less distant. I started thinking about how often people search for that feeling without even realizing it. They talk to friends, they share moments online, they send messages into the world hoping that somewhere, somehow, someone will respond in a way that feels real, not just polite, not just automatic, real. Because when someone responds with genuine emotion or thoughtful words, it creates something deeper than a simple interaction. It creates connection, and connection, even in the smallest form, has a quiet power. Your comment carried that kind of power. It made me realize how easily people underestimate the impact of their words. Most of us think our thoughts are too small to matter. We assume that what we say will disappear quickly, lost in the endless flow of conversations happening everywhere at once. But sometimes a single thought reaches exactly the person who needed to hear it. And when that happens, the moment becomes bigger than the words themselves. I found myself imagining the person behind that comment, not in a detailed way, but in a human way. Someone somewhere, living their own life, experiencing their own quiet nights and thoughtful moments. Someone who took a few seconds to write something sincere without knowing that those words would travel across distance and arrive here, creating this unexpected feeling of understanding. It's almost poetic when you think about it. Two people who may never meet, connected for a brief moment through nothing more than a few lines of text and the emotions hidden inside them. And yet that moment is real. It exists here in the silence of this night, in the space between thoughts where reflection slowly grows deeper. The more I sit here thinking about it, the more I realize that understanding doesn't always require long conversations or grand gestures. Sometimes it appears quietly, through something small and simple that carries the right emotion at the right time. Your words carried that emotion. They felt honest in a way that didn't try to impress anyone. They felt honest in a way that didn't try to impress anyone. There was no performance behind them, no attempt to make them sound bigger than they were. Just a straightforward expression that somehow revealed something meaningful beneath the surface. And honesty like that has a way of staying with you, because when someone speaks honestly, it creates a kind of trust in the moment. Even if that moment is brief, even if it exists only through a screen and a few sentences, it still carries a sense of authenticity that's hard to ignore. That authenticity is what keeps returning to my thoughts tonight. It reminds me that real connections don't always arrive in the ways we expect. Sometimes they appear quietly, disguised as ordinary moments that most people would overlook. A comment, a message, a few words written without any plan or expectation. Yet within those words, there can be understanding. Yet within those words, there can be understanding. Is within that understanding, there can be comfort. And within that comfort, there can be the realization that someone else out there is thinking, feeling, and observing the world in a way that isn't so different from your own. That realization changes the way the night feels. The silence around me no longer feels empty. Instead, it feels thoughtful, like the calm space where ideas and emotions slowly settle into place. Your comment continues to exist in that space, not as something loud or overwhelming, but as a quiet reminder that genuine words have the ability to travel farther than we realize, reaching someone at the exact moment when their mind is open enough to truly hear them, creating a brief but meaningful connection between two distant lives that may never cross paths again, yet still share this quiet moment of understanding, carried by a simple comment that continues to echo gently through the stillness of the night, where reflection grows deeper and the feeling of being understood remains present in a calm and steady way that makes the long hours feel a little less lonely while the mind continues exploring the meaning behind those few sincere words that somehow found their way here and settled softly into a place where they continue to exist like a quiet conversation unfolding in the silence between thoughts while the world outside remains asleep and the awareness of that unexpected understanding continues to move slowly through the heart like a calm realization that sometimes the most genuine connections appear when we least expect them through nothing more than a few honest words shared across the invisible distance between two people who briefly meet in the quiet space of a single thoughtful moment. Life has a quiet way of bringing people into our thoughts when we least expect it. Most days pass normally. We wake up, move through routines, speak to familiar faces, and watch the hours disappear without thinking too deeply about the small moments that happen along the way. Everything feels ordinary, predictable, almost mechanical. But sometimes something very small interrupts that rhythm. Not a dramatic event, not something loud that forces the world to stop. Just a simple moment that slips into your day quietly and begins to grow in your mind long after it should have faded. Tonight, that moment was your comment. I didn't expect it to stay with me like this. When I first saw it, it looked simple. Just a few lines. Nothing complicated, nothing that tried to stand out. But the strange thing about life is that the moments that truly matter rarely arrive with noise or attention. They appear softly, almost unnoticed, and only later do we realize how deeply they reached into our thoughts. Your words felt like that. They didn't demand anything from me. They didn't try to pull me into a conversation or ask for an answer. Stash. They simply existed, calm and honest, like someone placing a small thought into the world and letting it travel wherever it might go. And somehow, it came here. It's interesting how connections can form without planning. We often imagine that meaningful connections require long conversations, shared experiences, or time spent together. We think that understanding grows slowly through repeated moments, but sometimes understanding appears instantly. Sometimes it begins with something as simple as a single thought written at the right moment. Your comment carried that kind of feeling. The kind that makes you pause for a second and realize that somewhere out there, another mind is moving through similar reflections, noticing the same quiet details that many people overlook. That realization changes something inside you. It's not in a dramatic way, not in a way that turns the world upside down, but in a subtle way that makes you look at the moment differently. It reminds you that even in a world filled with distance and noise, genuine thoughts still find their way from one person to another. The more I think about it tonight, the more I realize how unpredictable life really is. We cross paths with thousands of people without ever knowing them. We see faces, read messages, hear voices, and most of them pass by without leaving a mark. Yet every once in a while, someone says something that stays, something simple, but real. And suddenly, that small interaction becomes a quiet part of your memory. Your comment became that kind of moment. It made me realize that not every connection in life needs to be loud or permanent to matter. Some connections exist only for a short time, like brief lights appearing in the darkness. They sud how you use something meaningful for a moment and then gently fade back into the distance. But even when they fade, the feeling they created doesn't disappear immediately. It lingers. That's the feeling sitting with me tonight. A quiet awareness that somewhere out there is a person who shared a genuine thought without realizing that those few words would travel across distance and settle into the mind of someone lying awake in a silent room, reflecting on the strange and beautiful way human connections sometimes appear when we least expect them. Maybe you wrote that comment without thinking twice about it afterward. Maybe you moved on with your day, unaware that your words were still alive somewhere in the quiet hours of the night. Somewhere in the quiet hours of the night. That's the mysterious part of communication. We send our thoughts into the world, but we rarely see the full journey they take after leaving us. Your words took a journey tonight. They moved beyond the screen where they were written and entered a moment of reflection that continues to grow deeper with every passing minute of this long and thoughtful night, where the silence feels heavier, yet somehow more meaningful, because it carries the echo of something genuine, shared by someone who may never fully realize how far their words traveled once they entered the quiet space of another mind that continues to return to them again and again, exploring the feeling behind them, exploring the feeling behind them, exploring the feeling behind them. Recognizing the simple truth that sometimes the most unexpected connections arrive without warning and leave a quiet mark that stays long enough to remind us that even the smallest moments of honesty can create meaning in places we never intended. Just, allowing two distant lives to briefly share the same emotional space through nothing more than a few carefully written words that continue to exist here in the calm darkness of this sleepless night, where the mind remains awake, not searching for answers, not expecting anything more, simply acknowledging the quiet beauty of a moment that began with a comment and slowly became something deeper through the natural and unpredictable way. Human thoughts and feelings find each other across the invisible distance that separates us, while still allowing small pieces of stud understanding to travel freely between hearts that may never meet yet somehow recognize each other for a brief and thoughtful moment in the endless flow of time.